40 weeks ago, the Swedish activist Greta Thunberg stood on the steps of the Swedish parliament and said, "I'm not going to school, I'm striking for climate." She has prompted a worldwide wave of momentum. Tweeting yesterday, she said, "Tomorrow we school strike for the right to a future," in 1,623 places in 119 countries around the world. Now, Fridays for Future has become really the rallying mantra of these, and they've posted online, they've got an interactive map, and this is a screenshot of it, where all these protests have and are going to be taking place. All of these pins, you can see here how vast it is over Europe, but also stretching worldwide. And so for 24 hours, starting, of course, in New Zealand and Australia, the protests have begun. This is New Zealand in Wellington, and you can see students out in force with their banners saying, "We're not going to school today, we're striking for climate." Very similar scenes here in Australia as well. Predominantly young people in the crowd, packing out the street there with their banners and their placards. But let's cross continents, because this truly is a worldwide movement. This is Leah from Uganda. Now, she's really been spearheading the protests at her school. There you can see her preparing for today's protests, making some posters. And we can see just the same in Ireland as well. School children painting posters to say, "Tomorrow we march." But this has all really started in Europe. That's been the centre stage, the epicenter, if you like, of these protests. Well, let's go now to our correspondent, Jessica Saltz, who's in Berlin. Jessica, just tell us what's due to take place in Germany today.
Well, the branch of the Student Fridays for Future movement is planning to hold its biggest protest to date today. In a few hours' time, tens of thousands of students will be coming to here, Berlin, at the Brandenburg Gate behind me, but also to over 269 cities, towns and villages across the country. These young people taking to the streets, they've been airing a lot of their frustration on social media ahead of the protest in Germany today, saying that this feels like to them the only way that they can really get their voice heard on climate change, because of course many of them are too young to vote in the European election. These protests have really cast a light on just how important the issue of climate change is, and helped the issue of climate change become the most important one on German voters' minds in the European elections. And for that reason, the Fridays for Future top organisers have actually been doing the rounds on a lot of public debates and talk shows ahead of the European elections. These young students have been pitted on German television against established politicians from political parties twice their age, and challenging these politicians on what these students believe is irresponsible climate change policy. And so to that end, the Social Democrats and Conservatives governing Germany at the moment have been trying to put climate change at the heart of their campaign, but it's really been seen as quite half-hearted by German voters. In these student protests are actually adding to the success of the Green Party in Germany. The Green Party, according to predicted polls, looks set to get about 18% on Sunday, an 8% rise of how it did in 2014. But of course, it's not only here in Germany where people are taking to the streets to call for climate change action. Brian Carter is in Brussels, where there are going to be walkouts today there, and also across Belgium.
That's right, Jessica. Not just in Brussels, across Belgium. Thousands of students are expected today to walk out of school to join this massive demonstration in the capital to voice their concern on climate change. And for these students, this is the culmination of 19 straight weeks of protests. Since January, there have been weekly marches in Brussels and other cities in Belgium to call on leaders to act, to finally do something about climate change, or as they put it, the climate crisis or the climate collapse. And this time around, they'll also be joined by some parents, by teachers, by labor unions, by NGOs. So this is really a massive movement only 2 days before national and regional elections here in Belgium, on which the protesters are hoping to weigh in. But of course, they're also hoping to influence the outcome of the EU elections that are currently ongoing. They're hoping that the next MEPs will put climate change at the center of their decision-making process, and they're calling for measures such as zero emissions of greenhouse gases, of an end to fossil fuels, of a just just transition for workers and for developing countries who can sometimes be left behind by this process of changing the economy. So all of this really has been growing over the past months, and I would say even over the past few years, even inside the European Parliament, in the corridors of the Parliament, an issue, climate change, that used to be on the fringes of the political spectrum has now become mainstream, and you can hear most of the parties in the European Parliament really putting climate change in their program, calling for different measures to tackle climate change, with the notable exception of the far-right Eurosceptic parties. A lot of these parties don't believe that humans have any effect on climate change. They say that all of this is hysteria. And as you know, these parties are expected to make gains in the European elections and to gain more seats in the European Parliament. But this probably won't be enough to really curb this growing movement, this massive movement that we've seen building in Belgium and in different countries around the world, to finally call on political leaders to do something to save our planet.